Hello, coaches. So, looking forward to digging into Competency 5, maintains presence. Going to do a deep dive on this one as well. So, why don't we go ahead and get started? I'll share my screen and we'll just chat about the different elements and parts. So, maintains presence, Competency 5. This one saw quite a few changes from the old competencies, so it's absorbed silence, and it's an interesting one, and also a very important one. It's somewhat harder to measure in assessing, but yeah, we'll unpack it here. Definition: it is to be fully present, conscious with the client, and employing a style that is open, flexible, grounded, and confident. So just to be confident, grounded, and present coach. It's the way we hold ourselves. It's the way we appear. The way our clients can perceive us in this in coaching. It's going to impact their perception of the process. If they see us being uncomfortable, frustrated, distracted, nervous during the coaching process, almost always, in the absence of knowing what's going on, there's always going to be a story. So a client will see us and they'll perceive our nervousness and come up with their own story as to why we're nervous. And usually that story has to do with them having done something wrong. The story, if we're new coaches or something like that, the story might very well be that this is a bad service. But if it's a company that's well established that you work for as a coach, or if you normally are present, grounded, confident, and suddenly you're not grounded, you're not confident, you're not very present, you're distracted, then what is that story? It's, that was bad. Let me go back on that. What's that story? It is, something is wrong with me. Something is wrong with the client because clearly I've upset my coach. I've thrown them off. And even in a coaching session where you hear the coach lacking some presence, sometimes you hear the coachee or the client say, to ask questions like, is that what you're wanting? Is that what you had in mind? Like reassuring questions or check-ins with the coach to make sure that they didn't break anything, because that story is going to exist because of the feedback that the client is getting from the coach. So presence is very, very important. It's also really hard to train because it comes with it comes through the development of your core skills as a coach. And when you're building those core skills, you are going to go through a bit of a dip. Hopefully this isn't mirrored incorrectly, but this is Seth Godin's old book on the dip. And I often mention that that's the experience of a coach. You feel like you're pretty solid, and you get started with the coaching process and you feel like, oh yeah, I can do this. And then you get feedback and you recognize how many things you're not doing intentionally, or you're meaning to ask open questions, but you're asking a lot of closed questions. You're meaning to be succinct, but you're just rambling on with your questions. You're meaning to be offering some space, but you're interrupting the client, and you can begin seeing yourself do those things. And because you're seeing yourself doing those things, it gets you frustrated, it gets you off your game. And it's rough. Usually people drop out of a training, in my experience, they drop out of a training when that process begins, when they have gone from this space of confidence, and now because of coach training, they are worse. They're a worse person. They're a worse coach. They do a worse job. And it feels bad. It stinks to be in that bottom valley. It's also called consciously incompetent. And the goal is to get the competence, but to get there, we have to push through and have a little bit less natural level of competence that leads to a natural unconscious competence. That comes with time. Presence comes with time, and you can kind of fake it, but it's, not being grounded, not being confident, not being present. That's going to be communicated in small ways. Now I'm rambling too much. It's just an important one to understand. That it's maintaining presence is a bit more complicated than just, hey, be confident. All right. Number 1, these are the elements: remains focused, observant, empathetic, and responsive to the client. And I think responsive is one of the most important ones in terms of assessing. That's what I'm looking for. If the client is doing something, if they've shifted their behavior, the tone shift, body language shift, anything like that, or if they are using the same word 4 or 5 times in a row and there's some power behind that word and the coach just moves on, ignores it, doesn't bring it into the exploration, then yeah, that's a major movement away from being present with the client. The coach might be present with themselves and their own thinking, but they're not present with the other person that they're coaching. Number 2, demonstrates curiosity during the coaching process. Another way to look at this is, are we listening for understanding, or are we listening for out of curiosity? If I'm listening for diagnostic understanding of things, this isn't the same as like the understanding of the story, backstory. It's like I'm listening through the agenda setting because I want to figure out what's really going on under the surface of this client's problem, so I can have a better understanding of what's going to serve them, what's going to fix their problem for them. That kind of listening, which we'll see in active listening, or listens actively as competency. But that kind of listening moves us out of the coaching presence and more into a problem solver presence. And so the kinds of questions we ask are going to be born out of that sense of, oh, what's around the corner based on my own intuition and my own diagnostic interpretation of what's going on here. So instead of that type of listening, most of the time, we should have a curiosity listening, a presence that is leaning forward, interested to hear the story of the client, and interested to see the client continue to unpack that story. Again, in line with all the other competencies, with the agenda set, with the desired outcome in place, with the intention of helping the client consider next steps with the 8th competencies. But we demonstrate curiosity rather than expertise. That's the main thing. Number 3, manages one's emotions to stay present with the client. There's a professionalism to our emotional state as coaches. We are not stone. We are not completely disconnected. We still need to be warm and empathetic. But, one thing I often say is the coach is like the comedian. The comedian does not get on stage because they're happy. Oftentimes, the comedian's not happy. They might be struggling. They might be on a very long tour and exhausted. But they get up and do their stand-up bit, and they lean in to the performance because their goal is the emotional state of their audience, to bring happiness to the audience. Now, we're not doing that in a manipulative way as coaches, but we do have a job to do when we are in the coaching session. So if we are coming in, like we have 3 minutes before we have a session and our emotions are a bit shot because Nikki and I were arguing right beforehand, and I know she was wrong. And so I'm like, oh, I how can I formulate my arguments and get all my troops in the right order so I can defeat her arguments against me or something like that. The normal thing where maybe you're bringing in arguments, frustration with the news of the world or whatever it is, those things, as much as possible, we set to the side by choice. We know that this world is very distracting, but we have a job to do. And we take care of those things outside as much as possible. We avoid burnout by taking care of ourselves. And yet when it comes to getting on the stage, most of the time, even if we don't feel like we're going to be the best coach, we need to be able to step into coaching presence as a choice and have a process to do that. Maybe it's deep breathing. Maybe it's having a conversation with Nikki to smooth things over and admit I was wrong ahead of time. Even if it's a 30-second run downstairs, I've done that plenty of times. or just making a note of when I'm going to have a thought for the other distractions or the other conversations that might need to happen. Being intentional about my emotional state and what I'm going to do to address distractions is an important function. It is a part of the job. Very rarely would I encourage coaches to not do a call because of their emotional state. You do have to have your boundaries and your limits. But again, just because you're not feeling into coaching, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't coach. Have good boundaries though. Well, that's kind of covered in other content. And of course, in the class, we often talk about the boundaries and how to balance our needs with the fact that we have a stage to get onto. Number 4, demonstrates confidence in working with the strong client emotion, or just strong clients, I could say. Strong client emotions during the coaching process. Sometimes you have a client that just is just strong. They push. They're like a bulldozer, or they're very strong defender of their values, of their perspectives, and sometimes that their emotions feel, even if they're not directed at you, you can feel like it's pushing against you. And even when that happens, or even if they are pushing directly against you, your ability to maintain your presence is really important. I was bullied for, I was very young in my classes. I started kind of a year early, so I was bullied a lot of times throughout high school. So anytime, the reason I'm saying this is anytime a client does certain types of pushback, especially if it is something along the lines of saying something that I didn't say and like acting as if I had said that or something like that. It's pretty unique case. It's very rare that it happens in coaching, but if a coach or if a client pushes back in a certain way, it can instigate those old thoughts from the bullying days. And I have to be able to say, oh, that's my thing. Set it to the side so I can demonstrate confidence and presence with a client that's being strong. They are not Billy from school. They're this client, and I'm here to serve them. So, of course, boundaries are important. If the client is acting inappropriately, that's a bit different. But if they are just strong, if they are expressive, and if that expressiveness rubs you in a challenging way, it's good to be able to still maintain your presence, to recover, to breathe, to leverage the coaching process and to trust that process. Maybe check back in, or maybe just know that there's value in you doing a bit of an observation where you reflect back the same energy and the same expression as the client for their own reflection. So we have confidence even when working with someone who is challenging because it's our job. And we want to serve them best. And sometimes they're just in a state of a mess, and maybe they don't intend to push so hard. But sometimes that's the nature of their agenda that they're bringing. Is comfortable working in a space of not knowing. I love this one, and it is something that is very important to MCC level coaching and corporate coaching, executive coaching. Sometimes coaches in training push against this whenever I do, share certain recordings or do certain demonstrations. And it usually comes from the space of I'm more confident when I can filter their experience through my own experience, filter their experience through my own work as an advisor, someone who's an expert in my field. However, sometimes the client's door is open because they had to go to a conference room that they weren't expecting to be in, and the door has to be open, and others are around them. They can hear the conversation. So now, instead of this client who normally talks very clearly, instead of that, you're getting a client who's almost speaking in code. And you don't exactly know what they're talking about. They know what they're talking about, but they can't let anyone around them know. And that's, of course, not an ideal situation. But if you find yourself coaching a person in that space, how do you coach them? Trust the process, trust the client's language, help them set the agenda, use their code language. But you might find yourself from time to time coaching without knowing at all what was the focus of the session. This happens sometimes with high profile coaching, executive coaching, where the client doesn't feel like they can divulge or they're restricted in what they can divulge. So they need to talk about, yeah, this project and some of the people I work with. And they might be very abstract, or they might use, you know, abbreviations or whatever it might be. So in those cases, we trust the process and we have this level of comfort knowing that the coaching is not dependent on our knowledge of the client's situation, but their knowledge of their situation. And we are following along with them, using their language, using the other competencies, and we are comfortable knowing that there's still value, even if by the end of the session, all we get from them is, okay, I think I know what to do now. Okay, I got it. Next time we talk, I might say, well, how did it go? And I guess went well. Okay, I don't know what you were talking about, what you were doing, but good work. Again, there's always, this isn't the only competency element. There's a lot of other factors and exceptions and all that kind of stuff. But are we able to be comfortable if the client can't give us all the information? Because there's always more information we could try to get. Is it okay if we don't? Number 6, creates or allows space for silence, pause, reflection. So this comes from the old active listening one, from the old form of the ICF competencies. Now, this is in between maintaining presence and listens actively. I think it touches both. To have good presence, though, you need to be able to have good space. So after the client is done speaking, for the coach to give 3 to 5 seconds of silence is really valuable. And after you're done asking a question, to be able to allow a client to consider that question. And if you see them struggling and they're like, I don't know, like just to be able to sit there and watch them and be comfortable with that process as they are thinking and processing. Now, there's a cycle. There's a cycle of, move some stuff around. Oops. Reshare. There's a cycle in coaching of space, and client language, and open questions. So if a coach wants to improve, they need to be able to offer space. And so when you're wanting to do more transformative work or more meaningful coaching, it kind of starts with giving some time to the client to think. We need that. That allows us to think more about our next question and trimming it down to its core. And it should also help us to, once we have either the language first or the question first, usually it's actually probably should have language first, then question. But you can take time in that space to have a nice open question, meaningful client language. And with these things in place, it leads to good space. This is the difference also between an information question. Oh, this is ugly. Let's do text boxes. Information versus exploration. If I'm asking information-based question, there's not going to be space. If I say, when's the meeting? And they say Friday. 4 seconds of silence feels really weird after that, right? But if I say, what's going to happen if this meeting doesn't go well? Or what happens if the train wreck really does happen during the meeting? Like that kind of question brings in client language, it's succinct, and it creates thought. And after they're done answering the question, they will likely be thinking a bit more about their response. So as coach, we see 4 seconds of silence after a nice, meaningful question. They're done answering, but they're still kind of thinking about the response. They probably will only perceive 1 to 2 seconds of silence at this, from their perspective, because their brain is still thinking and processing and kind of talking to itself, or landing from like an emotional state. So if we do not have exploratory questions, meaningful client language, then we're going to have less need for space. And if we have less space, it's going to be harder to have open, meaningful questions with meaningful client language. And so this can either cycle up or cycle down, and impact our presence dramatically. When we do not have this, let me get rid of that annotation. When we do not have an effective cycle of space, questions, and client language, then all of the other elements of coaching presence fall apart. And you see this, or I see this a lot in the assessing I do. So we allow space for silence, pause, and reflection. That allows the client to have some time to think, but it also allows us to restart our engine that further builds presence and evokes greater awareness on this, for the sake of the client. All right, key skills evaluated. The coach's depth of focus on and partnership with the client. The coach's depth of observation and use of the whole of the client in the coaching process. When you look here, these are going to be what this is: maintains presence, trust and safety. This is evoking awareness and listens actively. And this is kind of listens actively in silence. How do you measure presence? It's kind of how the coach shows up in alignment with the other competencies. So we have a depth to competencies 3 and 4. We have a depth of listens actively 6 and evokes awareness 7. And we have that space for reflection. So let's get to the competency comparison between ACC, PCC, and MCC. ACC, the coach demonstrates curiosity about the client and the client's agenda and is responsive to the information the client offers throughout the session. Again, I will just highlight the key things here: curiosity and being responsive. ACC criteria, the coach is curious throughout the session. It's usually demonstrated in how we use some of their language at the ACC level, but more so how the questions are at least unpacking the things that come up in the session. Are we demonstrating curiosity, or are we demonstrating problem solving? So we want to demonstrate curiosity. The coach acknowledges situations that the client presents, so we're tracking with them. And the coach allows the client to direct the conversation at least some of the time. So very similar to what we see with maintaining presence, trust and safety and maintaining agreements. But mainly we want to bring in a bit of that curiosity, at least some of the time, letting the client lead. Now, disqualification happens if the coach demonstrates significant interest in their own view, doesn't seek information, coach consistently directs the conversation, and attention seems to be on the coach's performance or demonstration of knowledge. Now, looking back, where are we at? Yeah, very, very similar to the trust and safety disqualifiers. So like I was saying before, maintaining presence usually is assessed or, invalidated in a recording or in a coach performance, and how the coach is performing in alignment with the other competencies. There's a confidence and a depth to that performance. PCC markers, let's get into these. 5.1, the coach acts in response to the whole of the person, and we have this confidence to explore the who. Now that idea of the who comes in a bigger way, much bigger way, with MCC work. MCC level, just as a heads up, this is like the whole exploration. Is like every time the coach talks, there's something there that shows that the coach is acting in response to the person. The coach acts in response to what the client wants to accomplish throughout the session, the focus, the session, situation, topic, subject. So we're staying on the what as well. staying on topic. Coach partners with the client by supporting the client to choose what happens in this session. So trust and safety, maintaining agreements, but also to have this sense of comfort. Like, I trust you. Like, as we maintain our presence, our body language, our tone, our confidence conveys this trust in the partnership. And that's what maintaining the presence is all about. Coach demonstrates curiosity to learn more about the client. We've kind of unpacked that in a few different ways. And the coach allows for silence, pause, or reflection. ACC pause, I would say, is around 2 to 3 seconds. PCC pause needs to be around 3 to 4 seconds. And MCC pause needs to be kind of consistently more than 4 seconds or more. There's always exceptions to all that. And the main thing is the more transformative the work and the higher readiness of the client, the more the coach might leverage silence, because the coach is helping the client process more effectively. And sometimes that processing is happening silently as the client is thinking about the words and just experiencing things internally. The coach doesn't step in on that internal processing. We just see that as a part of the greater processing. So we give space to that. MCC overview, the coach is fully partnering with the client in the coaching dialogue and is a connected observer to the client, holding both the objective and emotional perspective simultaneously. The connection is to the whole of the client, who the client is. There you go. That's the big one. Who the client is, what the client wants, how the client learns and creates, and how the client leads the coaching conversation. Trusting the client fully. And like, keep in mind, this comes up in subtle ways. The raised eyebrows that we talked about with trust and safety, the little hesitation, the tone shift of the coach that might betray just this little bit of doubt. And if we do have that intuition, this MCC perspective brackets the intuition effectively and openly allows the client to respond in any way to that intuition instead of letting that intuition betray itself through our body language or our tone. The coach evidences a genuine curiosity for the client. As with cultivates trust and safety, the coach is in a complete partnership with the client, where the client is an equal or greater contributor to the conversation and the direction of the coaching than the coach. Now, I often say it, as we look at MCC level work, the coach has this chosen perspective that this person is a greater than me person, and I am along for the ride, helping them do their own work. Even if you have 20 more years of life experience, work experience, and you are more of an expert in the field they work in, when you are in this space of very transformative work, client-driven coaching, we have this sense of, client, you are greater than me. And I think that is a good perspective for any level of coach to have. It doesn't matter the credential you own. For you to be able to step into the sense of, I'll defer to you. I trust you. I believe that you can come up with something greater than I can come up with. And to start from that premise, it's very Carl Rogers, client-led therapy approach that has years of backing, decades of research around it, and it can be very effective to help in the coaching space to support a person's own decision making, goal setting, and figuring things out for themselves. So, at the MCC level, the conversation between the coach and the client is equal and easy, and even when it is uncomfortable. And like I said before, the coach isn't paid to make the client comfortable, but to help the client feel safe as they do uncomfortable work. And part of that safety is in our confidence that they haven't thrown anything off. You often have a client say, I'm being a bad client today. This is good work. Thank you for being so willing to do the work with me, client. Let's keep going. Having this confidence that, you didn't break anything. Let's keep going. How do we evaluate the behavioral statements for the MCC? The coach responds to the client in a manner that keeps the conversation flowing with the client leading the way. Flow is really important here. Being responsive again. And when you look at the MCC level, there's a sense of consistency. every input needs to be a reflection of what's come before it, whether holistically of the coaching relationship from the beginning of the session, a few paragraphs back, or what was just said. The coach is constantly, every input is responsive to the client. Again, kind of a good thing for any coach to do. It's just hard to do consistently. And that's why it's a part of the MCC minimum standards. The coach remains curious and attentive to the client, exploring what the client needs throughout the session. The coach engages in the coaching conversation with ease and fluidity. So this goes with the idea of, nothing's going to throw me off. I'm here to do the job. And even if it's uncomfortable, I'm not going to stack my questions. I'm going to acknowledge that this question might need to be a bit messy. And here's the question. What are your thoughts on the question? Like, I'm just going to be okay. Like, it's just an okay session. And I'm not worried about being a grand performer, having the right questions, or I'm not even worried about fixing things for you because I can't. It's yours to fix. So engages in the coaching conversation with this ease and fluidity, really trusting the process in a professionally relaxed way. The coach leverages silence to support the client and the client's growth. So we've talked about that. The coach is able to create more processing that naturally leads to 4 or more seconds of silence. Lesser client language, less open questions, more stacked or multiple questions in a row, all that kind of stuff makes it harder for there to be actual space. So the coach at the MCC level knows how to start that engine with spaciousness and leverage the client language in nice, concise questions to create that virtuous cycle. Finally, disqualifiers at the MCC level. The coach does not treat the client as a full partner. Around the agenda or the process itself, very similar to what we've seen before with trust and safety. Coach exhibits interest in the coach's view rather than the client's view, doesn't seek information. Again, it's not that we're asking information questions, but we're not absorbing information. We don't have our radar or our mind tuned to grab the information from the client's thinking, doesn't seek information about the client's goals, or the coach's attention seems to be on the coach's own performance rather than or demonstration of knowledge rather than the performance of the client. The coach does not invite the client to share their thinking on an equal level with the coach. So very similar to other things. Maintaining presence is an expression of the other competencies, but that expression is one of confidence and depth, and it takes time. A lot of it does start with silence in a coaching session. Going ahead and trying the process, even if it feels uncomfortable and unfamiliar to you. And being responsive. Whatever the client says, try to bring that into whatever question or reflection you're going to do. And that should, over time, help you build the presence. It's not something to learn about. It's something to gain confidence through experience. All right, that's a long one. I love this one, though. So hopefully this was helpful. Thank you for watching me drone on about the ICF competencies and how they compare at the different levels as we increase our range as coaches to serve our clients better. Thank you for listening, and as always, thank you for coaching.